Hey, my name is Justin, and I'm your host for the Young Pastors Podcast, wanting to provide resources for young pastors. I still feel like I'm a young pastor. I've been doing ministry for years, but I've had lots of different experiences in many different positions working within the church. And let me tell you, I feel like the Swiss Army knife of of pastors. Just kind of, hey, we're going to stick this guy over here and, let him do his thing. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today, and I'm actually pretty excited about this because this is something that if you've been in the same church for a long time, you don't always really think about it. If you're new to leading within the church and you're wondering why people don't feel welcome when they come to the walls, or why people don't stick around or don't show up a second time, today's episode it might be for you. What I'm going to be addressing is communicating like guests are in the room. And this sounds so simple, but like I did last week, I'm going to share a little bit about my church experience here. I'm going to share a little bit about me and how I dealt with the situation, but not only that, but some practical things that you can do this week to start communicating like guests are in the room. The first thing is the church that I'm at. I'm just going to continue to say this because they are outstanding. They are incredible. They love people well. And that's one of the things I just feel so blessed to come into, because this was a part of the DNA of the church already. But when I first came in, if you weren't a part of the group, you didn't know certain things that were taking place within the service. When I first came in, I didn't really know what to do with my kids. When I first came in, I was greeted, which was awesome. But, I did communion a little bit different than my background. I did communion a little bit different than the way in which they did it. They did more of a communion meditation time, which, is... Instead of us taking everything in unison at the same time, there's a part of the service that's carved out for where the elements will be passed out. But, you take a personal moment of prayer and evaluating your heart, and then you take communion when you feel led to within the boundaries of that moment. And that was really different for me. Our kids ministry, our kids ministry, it was, we released at a different time, meaning that we didn't go drop our kids off immediately in the children's ministry. But what we did was they waited till after worship to release the kids to go to children's ministry. And so that was just something that was kind of unique and different, and I didn't know. And so immediately there were things that were just taking place that made me feel like an outsider. Don't get me wrong, I was greeted, I was welcomed. People, I felt appreciated and loved. But the problem is I also felt uncomfortable because I had no clue what was going on. And so one of the things that, we wanted to do coming in is think of ways in which we can communicate like guests are already there. And, this starts from the moment people come to the front door, communicating like guests are in the room or guests are coming into the room. If you're hanging out and you're talking with somebody, a good friend within the church, maybe have your greeter the minute they spot somebody new come in, just stop talking to that person. I know it feels impolite, but the moment that everybody should understand that we're excited to have that new person come to the front door. So just stop the conversation right there, roll over and say hi, greet them. Help set things up, help them walk them through what's going to be happening with their family so that they don't feel overwhelmed. I didn't know where the bathrooms were, explain to them where the bathrooms are, different things like that. But the big thing for us that was a shift was actually welcoming guests in our service. The order of service, it allowed for that opportunity, but it was just guests weren't really considered. And again, it's just not thought of sometimes. So what we did was at the welcome, the very first thing I do is I come out and I go, hey, look, you know what? If you're visiting with us today, we're so grateful that you are here. We know that it takes a lot of work coming through the doors of the church for the first time. There's anxiety, there's worry. You're already trying to get the kids out the door. and you're stepping into a new environment for the very first time. And here's the other thing too. One of the things that we don't realize is another thing that makes it hard is that you might they're not just lost people coming through your front door. You could have hurt church people coming through your front door, and it's even harder for them to step in because everything is a trigger for them. They're looking at things and they're going, "Did our last church do this?" And they're associating negative things with the positive things that you're enacting because of the fact that they just had a bad experience somewhere else. And so we want to help diffuse that on the front end. And so communicate like guests are in the room and do it weekly, even if guests aren't there. Don't take a quick glance over the audience and go, "Okay, we have a guest this week." No, communicate with them in like every single Sunday. It's going to feel silly. Everybody in the audience, if you have 45 people in your church or 100 people in your church, they're going to look around and go, "Who's new?" But you cannot wait until guests get there before you start communicating like guests are in the room. And the reality is if you wait, you will never do it because it won't be a part of your routine. You'll forget. It's not going to be a priority. It will always be on the back burner, and it will never make itself. It'll never be a regular thing that you practice. But what's so amazing is that when you talk like guests in the room, eventually there will be guests in the room. And another thing that we do in communicating like guests are in the room is we help lead them throughout the service. It's not just what we say from the stage, but it's a slide, like letting them know what we're about to do. If we're going to do communion, we throw a communion slide up on the screen. That way they're not like, while we're waiting for somebody to get up on stage and lead us in communion, they're not going, "What's going on? Why is everything stopped?" Right? Kids exit this way, a big sign that pops up, and our kids leave before communion starts and to go to their children's service. And so, we'll throw the kids, BCC kids this way with an arrow, and so they'll all walk out the room. I mean, we do it differently. So it's really important that they're able to, that people are able to know what to do with their kids. When it comes to communion, explaining, what you're going to be doing before you actually do it, because people come from different backgrounds. And you may do communion differently. It doesn't mean that they're lost. They just grew up doing it differently. And so, consider that. In your message, communicate to people who are guests. Think of ways to communicate. Make sure that things are in the bulletin, and there's ways in which people can sign up for things, not just physical, but even use digital ways. These things, it's a lot of work to get them rolling, get them up, but it's so worth it because you want people to reference. Make sure that they can access the information throughout the week. Communicating like guests are going to be there is not just making sure that our people know what's going on, but having an avenue in which guests can look up and see what's going on within our church. Have your calendar on your website. Have a newsletter that you send out via social media. Have, these things. Communicating like guests are a part of things. And because we want them to come in and be a part of things. We want them to serve with one another, get to know with each other, grow in relationship. We want them to feel like they can come step into certain groups that you have going on. And so a lot of that boils down to communication. So one of the things that you can do this week before the weekend is start thinking about how well do we communicate like guests are a part of our service? How well do we communicate that like guests are in the room? How do we set that up on the front end of the service? How throughout the week do we communicate like we're anticipating guests to be a part of our service? And we'll talk about this another time when it comes to the actual greeting portion, because this is another way of preparing for guests that I think is a big deal. There's greeting, and then there's thoughtful greeting. Great resources for this. There's a book out there called Unreasonable Hospitality. It's not a Christian book, I'll warn you ahead of time, but it helps with thinking through this whole idea of people coming into the church as guests. And I think Andy Stanley wrote something too. I don't follow Andy Stanley that much. I know he's a killer leader. Not a big fan of his theology, honestly. But at first I thought he was misunderstood. And the more he talks, the more I realize, no, I don't know how misunderstood he really, but he's a great leader. He's a great leader. So, he talks about the difference between, I think, volunteers and guests. I believe that's him. It might have been somebody else. But anyway, these are just some practical things that you can do. All right. And so I just want to encourage you, take the time to do it. Have a little gift for them, so that you can get their information and you can communicate with guests in the middle of the week. And this is great for student ministry and children's ministry as well. Man, one of the things that's really, really cool is putting birthdays on the back of kids' tags. Oh my gosh, a new kid comes in and they're identified by the sticker on their back, and they have a birthday on there. Man, wish them happy birthday. You want to make a kid feel special, wish them happy birthday on their first day, and they're going to be like, how'd you know? And they'll never know that it's on the sticker on the back. And man, they're going to come out of there, and if people's kids are happy, man, parents are going to be happy, and more than likely they're going to be back next week. Anyway, so just some thoughtful things to consider. Thank you so much for listening to the Young Pastors Podcast, and we'll talk later next week.